When night first stirs the chilled dusk air, a whisper lurks with a hunter's stare. Red eyes flash, then are gone. Its frenzied feeding finished by dawn.
Hi, I'm Desirae.
And I'm Mariah.
We're two sisters with a love of storytelling
and the paranormal. And you're listening to
As
the Crow Flies.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this week. So I want to start out with something interesting that happened to me in between the release of our first episode and now. So Mariah, have you heard of this thing called the Haversine formula?
No, I haven't.
So I was talking about our podcast with some people in the kitchen at my job, and the person I was talking to, she was asking about what was our show called. And so when I told her it was As the Crow Flies, this other gentleman who was in there, he was like, oh, As the Crow Flies. Well, have you heard of the Haversine formula? And like you, I hadn't heard of it. So I asked him about it, and he started explaining that in math terms, that's the formula that they use to calculate the distance that, quote, a crow would fly between 2 points. So basically, it's the shortest distance between 2 points with their latitude and longitude, and it factors in the curve of the Earth's surface, which I thought was pretty cool to know. I didn't even realize there was a formula for that. So now, when you're, thinking, when you're trying to find a distance between places, you can think of us and the Haversine formula.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think hearing that, it also feels like aligned with what I felt was our reason for starting this podcast. For me specifically, I fall down a lot of rabbit holes of information, and even in our first 2 episodes, just kind of follow the trail and see where it leads me, about myths, legends, even the real world. And so then we're here to share it with everybody.
Yeah.
And I feel like we end up taking the winding route and circling back around to bring everyone down as straight of a path as we can. As the crow flies.
Yeah. And so I don't think that we've even really mentioned sort of the meaning behind our show name, As the Crow Flies. So I always think about, like, as a crow is just flying over all of the different places that crows fly, and the bird's eye view, and like the secrets they must know, and the cryptids that they've probably actually seen. And it just is a really creepy, eerie kind of thought when you think about all of the things that crows have seen that they shouldn't have seen, or that people have only, told stories about, or things like that. So it's pretty cool.
It feels magical.
Yeah.
Like even this morning, I heard a crow in one of the trees as I was taking Goose out for his morning bathroom break, and just felt the urge to greet the crow. And I just feel like that connection to them, and am happy to give that perspective somewhat to our listeners. That feels weird to say.
Yeah, right. And also, in relation to crows, I too like shiny things. So there's that.
Yes, I've told Nate many times, I am a bird attracted to all the shiny, beautiful baubles.
So this week we have some pretty interesting stuff for you guys. So the information gathered for this week's origin story comes from Nick Redfern's Chupacabra Road Trip in Search of the Elusive Beast. And this book will be tagged in our show notes. And so here we go. Suspicions of an elusive blood-sucking creature began in March 1995 in Puerto Rico as slaughtered animals were discovered in the La Cordillera Central Mountain Range in the towns of Morovis and Orocovis. Locals grew weary and hysteria spread as peculiar puncture wounds were discovered on the bodies of these slain animals. This fear became amplified when the bodies were also discovered to be drained of their blood. With many of the slain animals being goats, the term Chupacabra was given to the mysterious monster. This Spanish name translates to goat sucker, highlighting the bizarre deaths of this beast's prey. Gossip spread among the locals about a crazed vampire-like creature on the loose as other reports from outlying islands began popping up. The death toll grew and the media picked up on this new mystery. However, there had still been no reliable sightings of this chupacabra. Later that same year, in August of 1995, Madeline Dolentina from Canovanas, located in the northeastern coast of Puerto Rico, came forward with a blood-chilling eyewitness description of this elusive creature. Dolentina described a bipedal creature around 3 feet tall with piercing large black eyes, bony fingers and toes, exaggerated limbs, and a sparse ridge of feathers or coarse fur along its back. She described this creature as moving in a hopping-like fashion as it traveled across the land. A young boy who worked for Tolentina's husband corroborated her sighting with a substitution of sharp spines for the feathers Tolentina had described. With a more close-up encounter, the young boy also attested to the beast having a mouthful of dagger-like fangs. Now that the people and the media had a description for this beast that was something out of a nightmare, word spread across Puerto Rico and eventually the world. Within a year of the first report, the chupacabra had been sighted in Mexico, then Brazil by the start of the 21st century, with reports of the bloodless bodies of farm animals in Sorocaba and Sao Paulo. Then the beast appeared to migrate to Chile, where hundreds of animals were found slaughtered in the same fashion. Later on in 2004, the chupacabra popped up in the southern United States and Texas, as other reports from outside of the U.S. continued to pop up as far away as Russia. In 1998, in the midst of this chupacabra craze, John Downs, director of the Center for Fortean Zoology, or CFZ, set out with his CFZ counterpart, Graham Inglis, to Puerto Rico and Mexico to search for evidence of this beast. Along with a camera crew from Britain's Channel 4, the group did not capture video evidence of the beast, but instead discovered feathers from a slain chicken that had been sliced and diced at the hands of a chupacabra. These feathers were said to have been doused in chupacabra saliva as a result of the attack. Later, paranormal researcher and noted monster hunter Nick Redfern paired with the Sci-Fi Channel for a production known as Proof Positive, Evidence of the Paranormal. In production of this show, Nick traveled to Puerto Rico to research this beast, the chupacabra, and provide forensic evidence to a team of scientists in an effort to either prove or refute this beast once and for all. Given this task, Nick reached out to John, who surprisingly still had these feathers in his possession. The two agreed to meet in Puerto Rico in an effort to come to a final conclusion. Were chupacabras real? And if they were real, what were they? A genetic defect? A genuine monster? Or were they just a myth? Together, the two interviewed many natives in Puerto Rico, one of whom was a man named Jorge, who ran a chicken farm. Jorge had reported a series of attacks on his flock in the late 1990s. He had awoken to a ramble of squawks and cries from his flock early that morning. When he went out to check hours later at daybreak, he found his entire flock lifeless. The birds all remained intact, but presented a distinct pair of large puncture holes in each of their necks, coupled with, you guessed it, a lack of blood. Interestingly enough, whatever it was that killed Jorge's chickens had the ability to open each individual cage. One by one, the beast opened the cages and drained the birds of blood until they lay there lifeless. The only evidence Jorge had of his animal's killer was a collection of coarse hairs found stuck in the wires of a particularly mangled cage. These hairs, however, had been long since handed over to a policeman, and that was the last he heard of the entire ordeal. Nick and John went on to interview another Puerto Rican rancher, Dominic, who reported 4 of his peacocks being slain in the same manner, but with an added report of a triangular probe to each of the 4 fowls' skulls. Upon veterinary examination, these birds were also distinctly missing blood, and thus the chupacabra was added again. Enraged by the attack on his prized poultry, Dominic stayed on guard, protecting his flock so vigilantly that he himself witnessed the beast firsthand. As the creature crept back through the fence in an attempt to finish off the flock of peacocks, its form was revealed with a bright flashlight. The creature reared up on its hind legs, let out a fearsome growl, and erected a large row of spikes trailing from its neck to its back. It was also said to have devilish glowing red eyes. Before Dominic could think enough to grab his gun, the creature retreated back through the hole in the fence from whence it came. Though it never took another one of Dominic's animals, he had several more encounters with this beast over the succeeding weeks before it vanished entirely. Sadly, upon airing of proof positive, Nick and John learned that their case-closing evidence had decayed so much that nothing was able to be determined of the sample. So, after doing the research for this origin story, I just found so many things so interesting. So Mariah and I, we are actually from Irving, Texas. And so growing up as little girls in northern Texas, I can always remember our dad and our grandfather teasing us of Chupi, the chupacabra. And we still, as adults, refer to him as Chupi and like talk and make jokes about Chupi. And it totally makes sense now, knowing the timeline of when sightings of the chupacabra started popping up in the late 1990s. And Mariah and I are born in the early 1990s. And so it was just really interesting to learn about the history of this creature beyond what we just heard as, you know, little Mexican American children growing up in Texas in the 1990s.
Yeah, exactly. And it was really cool for me to learn like that the surge in popularity was starting when we were at that age of like starting to tell spooky stories to your kids, and you start to instill those little tidbits into their lives that really they just carry with them for the rest of forever. I definitely
Like we did. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. I thought that the chupacabra was a lot older than 1990s. I did not realize that it's such a recent cryptid origin, I guess, and that it started in Puerto Rico. Maybe it's because of the stories we were told and our family's bias, knowingly or not, towards, Mexican folklore, that centered everything in Mexico for me in my mind. But learning that it was from Puerto Rico was a pretty cool fact, and I was just happy to learn about it.
Yeah, I remember as I was doing my research, I was confused when it was like started in Puerto Rico. I'm like, that's wrong. That should be Mexico. But no, like you said, it's just kind of what we have internalized because of what we heard as children growing up, and our minds just kind of stuck on that. Oh, these stories are being told, in Mexican families, so it must have started in Mexico kind of thing. And it was just really interesting to hear how Chupacabra started in Puerto Rico and then traveled to Brazil and then Texas and then Russia. That one totally threw me for a loop.
Very much. But the idea of this like larger, widespread potential habitat range for the chupacabra definitely has me looking forward to growing our explorations and quote unquote research outside of the US and, well, the contiguous US. Puerto Rico is part of the US, but beyond those borders. And who knows, there could be specialized subspecies that have branched off into the Russia territory. Maybe they've adapted to their harsh winters. That's a very different environment from Puerto Rico and Mexico. So
very different.
Perhaps their furry, luscious locks help them in the winter as opposed to their rugged spines. And, maybe even they go by a different name. So they could be more far spread than we realize. And differences in language, regional diets, maybe they don't suck on goats in Russia, who knows, could lead to this kind of confusion or unknowing factor in how far they really go beyond the Americas.
I agree. And it gets me excited too, to think about what more we have to research and share with other people. And speaking of sharing things, I think you've got some encounters for us.
Yes. So I have one actually bit of a longer encounter story. There are definitely a good handful of chupacabra encounters, but this one really stuck out to me, and I am so excited to share it with you guys. So while we have the pretty well-known appearances of the chupacabra in Puerto Rico in 1995, and then sightings moving up through Mexico and Texas since that time, finding personal encounters has been a bit harder than I expected. You'll see a lot of people posting pictures of like a little chihuahua or a scrappy looking dog, a family pet, joking that they've spotted a chupacabra for real. There also are quite a few sightings that tend to be explained later on as being a dog or a wolf with mange or scabies. There have been proven sightings of those mangy dogs, scientifically confirmed to not be any other, alien or cryptid species. But I don't feel like that should completely discredit the possibility of an actual chupacabra. So as I was looking further into this, I came across a very interesting story from a creepypasta website that I wanted to share. This will be a bit different from our encounters with the pukwudgies, but I felt like it was a very good description, both visually as well as viscerally, how the creature made the viewer feel. The article states, throughout Mexico, there was speculation about its existence and origin, the chupacabra. Many claimed it was simply a wolf. Others that it was the pet of extraterrestrials. Still others said it was an invention of ranchers seeking a bit of fame. I remember the first time I saw him. His sketch took up the entire front page of the newspaper. He was depicted as an alien with wings under his arms. This version was later replaced by many others, such as an alien with spines on his back, a bald, deformed wolf with a rat's face and tail, another of a very large wolf with red, phosphorescent eyes. Some even settled on a humanoid version of this creature. Once, they even tried to televise a trap to capture him so they could study him and finally determine what he was. His publicity was so extensive that he had his own merchandising line. There were funny t-shirts with his image on them. Posters and cards were sold, and he even had his own candy. It tasted awful, if I remember it correctly. Today, a cycling race in Ciudad Juarez is named after him, and he made a brief, triumphant appearance in a cowboy video game. At least that's the last I heard of him. But with all of this laid out, the same question always arises. Why wasn't its case formally investigated? Why wasn't the matter given the seriousness it demanded? I looked at the legend of the chupacabra, and then I looked at that of the monster of Gevaudan, a creature that ravaged ancient France to such an extent that the king himself sent his royal riflemen to hunt it down. And I see the pattern. I'm going to allow myself to be a bit sensationalist in stating that if both animals were related in some way, perhaps by the same creator, the monster of Givaudan would have taught the chupacabra the most important lesson. The monster of Givaudan is attributed with almost 150 murders. A chupacabra attack on a human was never officially reported. A neighbor on the block, by the way, has an interesting story that contradicts and in a way supports my theory. This neighbor's name is Raoul, and in 1995 he was serving time in the state prison. He said that creature was a demon, and that the day they came face to face, his least expected virtue was what ultimately saved him. During his time in prison, he had very few problems with the other inmates, because he wasn't tall and strong enough to be a troublemaker, nor was he small and weak enough to be anyone's scapegoat. He simply knew how to defend himself. The prison guards regularly sold him drugs, and he supplied them with the cigarettes he won in rebound games. There was one guard who helped him cheat at poker using sign language, which they both knew well. One uncharacteristically cool and damp night, with a light wind blowing from the west, when rain was a certainty, he stood at his cell window. He told me he stubbed out his cigarette and watched the clouds rolling in from that direction, heavy with rain and lightning, perfectly clear thanks to the moonlight bathing them. He was trying to see these clouds, which took on a pinkish hue as they drew closer to the city lights, when an unnatural bolt of lightning struck the hills in the distance. A succession of similar lightning flashes streaked across the night sky, which was already beginning to fill with rain clouds, bathing the area in that earthy, wet vegetated scent that precedes rain. He said he saw light of another strange nature dancing across the desert, lights that could easily be mistaken for lightning unless you paid close attention to their behavior and the constant frequency with which they appeared and disappeared. After about 5 minutes of that atmospheric spectacle, a period of serenity arrived, the calm before the storm, in which there was no thunderclaps. The lightning became less frequent, and a curtain of rain began its march from the hills towards them. Then, he said, far ahead of that curtain, an animal was running on all fours, at full speed, across the desert. He identified it as a dog, one faster than all the others. Obviously, it was very far away, and there was also a 10-meter wall separating them. But he couldn't help feeling a growing chill as the animal drew ever closer to the prison. For he said that this quadruped wasn't moving with the erratic or nervous behavior of any animal seeking shelter from a storm, but rather with the direction and speed of any predator that had found its prey. The wall came into his field of vision, and he could no longer see if the dog had changed course or if it had stopped nearby. He waited a while longer, hoping to see it go back the way it had come, or hear it bark. But after that time, he saw and heard nothing but lightning and rain. Then he went to sleep and forgot about it for the night. The following day, a yellow alert was activated because 3 guards had disappeared overnight. The inmates were moved to the yard, and the entire prison was searched for the missing men, but nothing was found all day. They knew the guards couldn't have left the prison on their shift, since their belongings were still in their lockers. Their cars were still parked in the lot, and there was no record of them leaving. But they couldn't have been in that prison, as the security camera footage and the guards in the watchtower hadn't indicated that anyone had left their post. The prison director requested support from the municipality, but they responded that they couldn't launch an operation until they confirmed it wasn't some kind of a system error, and that the missing men had somehow left the facility. They did say, however, that a search would be initiated throughout the area, in case the guards were in the vicinity. A direct line would be established to maintain contact. Since the prisoners were not allowed to remain in the yard, they were permitted, with some reluctance, to return to their cells around 7 in the evening. That day they had been allowed to do nothing more than stand in the yard, go to eat, and return to the yard. As night fell, something woke the inmates in their cells. Raoul was awakened by the commotion in the cell block, so he went to the bars to listen. Strange noises were coming from one of the other cells on the right side, and the frightened inmates on the other side were claiming a wolf was having them for lunch. Another commotion erupted when they saw it leave cell 1418 and enter cell 1419, almost casually, as if it were taking a stroll down the street. From what Raoul could see with his limited field of vision, there was no doubt that this was the animal he had seen running toward the prison the night before. Immediately afterward, its growl and the muffled screams of the occupants of that cell were heard, triggering screams and general panic throughout the cell block. The inmates began shouting and demanding the help from the guards, but no one appeared at the main gate. There was one in the security room, but he was locked inside and kept calling on his walkie-talkie, visibly agitated, while the animal left cell 1419 and headed toward 1420 with the same nonchalance. Nobody's going anywhere, he must have thought. The inmates in that cell tried to kick him to prevent him from entering, but he was a very slippery bastard. Raoul figured he must be to be able to get into a maximum security prison and kill 2 guards without anyone noticing, and he used another gap between the bars to get in. Immediately afterward, screams and the same strangling sound. The uproar from all the inmates intensified. Now they were banging on the bars and throwing toilet paper at the window of the guard room, demanding that the guard take action. Raoul and his cellmate had ripped a rod from their bed frame and were doing the same as the others. Perhaps they and their neighbors were the loudest and most desperate, since Raoul's cell, number 1423, was 3 cages away. An armed guard with a shotgun went through the main entrance toward the stairs leading to the second floor, and taking advantage of the fact that the animal was inside, inserted the barrel between the bars of cell 1420 and began firing his weapon repeatedly. He must have seen something, because he pulled the barrel out of the cell and stepped back, just before the animal came out and stood in front of him. The guard aimed and fired at the strange dog, but to everyone's surprise, the animal, in a single movement, moved out of the way of the shot and jumped on the officer's neck. After a few moments of madness and screams, the officer fell dead, and the animal simply released him, as if it already knew the proper procedure for killing, as if it did it systematically. And it didn't eat him. It didn't lick him. It didn't even taste a slice of his flesh. It simply turned toward cell 1421 and started moving. The men in cell 1421 were 2 of the toughest and most feared prisoners in the entire jail. The kind of people you wouldn't want to share a cell with, but the kind you'd want to be with in moments like this. By the time the animal reached their cell, they had mounted a kind of defense against it. They had dismantled the bunk bed, pressed both mattresses against the cell bars, and used the frame parts as a barrier. Additionally, they had pulled out their long-bladed knives and were brandishing them at the animal, ready to kill it if it tried to climb over the top. Raoul and everyone else thought that this would be the right way to contain the beast, and they were about to start reinforcing their cell bars in the same way when they saw the animal, very cleverly, propel itself under the mattress and wriggle around to make room to get in, ignoring the kicks and knife slashes from the 2 prisoners. There was a commotion of knife fights and a tremendous struggle in that cell, but in the end, it was nothing more than the same. Silence. Was there nothing that could stop that animal? Raoul looked for the guard in the security room who kept calling for help on the radio. He began to fear that this was the only guard alive in the entire cell block, and he realized that, if that were the case, he would never do anything. He wouldn't risk ending up like his shotgun-wielding colleague, and he would never let the prisoners out of their cages, for fear that they would riot, attack him, and escape. But he also didn't want to see them die one by one. But then he recognized him as the guard who helped him cheat at poker. The monster emerged from cell 1421 and headed for 1422, where a couple of terrified prisoners had tried their best to imitate those in cell 1421. But the quilts weren't strong enough to contain the demon, which slipped through a gap. They screamed and yelled, kicking the quilts wherever the animal approached, thinking it would work like playing Tetris pinball. The others shouted and gave them advice, but they couldn't stop the animal from getting in. This, however, finally planted the idea in Raoul's head. His cellmate was hysterical, trying to wedge the bunk bed against the bars. Raoul grabbed a piece of toilet paper and burned it with his lighter, which caught the guard's attention on the security camera. He used sign language to tell him as best as he could, "I'm going to catch him if you open the cage when I tell you to." The guard put his hand on the button for cell 1423 and waited. Raoul had to struggle with his cellmate to leave the first gap between the bars uncovered, giving the animal an entrance to the cell. He positioned himself at the far end of the cage where the door lock was and waited for him to appear. He said those seconds of waiting felt longer than the time he spent waiting for his sentencing. When it finally appeared, Raoul could get a better look at it. It was exactly as a demon should look. Its skin was scaly, mangy, and grayish. It had a hairy hump like a boar's. Its head was like a rat's, and its deep red eyes were unlike anything Raoul had ever seen. The most terrifying thing of all was that there was nothing in that animal's eyes. No anger, no fear, no hunger. It knew it had seen him enter the prison the day before and planned to kill him just like the others. Nothing special, nothing more. As soon as Raoul saw the monster's head appear through the bars, he signaled the guard, who pressed the button to open the cell. It slid open, trapping the animal by the middle of its body, causing it to howl and writhe in pain. The other prisoners also howled with cheers when they saw that no matter how much it twisted and thrashed to escape, it was firmly pinned at the waist. He tells me how, at first, Raoul hadn't the slightest idea what to do next. He only knew that those bars were the only thing standing between certain death and life. So he put all his heart into keeping the bars pressed down. He thought that, to have more support, he should lengthen his body and stay stretched out. It was a very bad decision. He took off one shoe to show me a terrible laceration on his ankle. He told me that he put his foot on the third bar so he wouldn't get tired, and the monster did that to him with a single bite in its fit of rage. He said it hurt like hell, but even so, he didn't stop applying force to the bars. The next thing he knew, the guard was systematically opening the gates to let the prisoners out and head to the dining room, the only place with the capacity to hold them all, and sealed enough so that the monster could not get in. The animal continued to struggle and howl in pain. More than once, Raoul thought that he couldn't hold it any longer and that it would escape, but he always used all his strength to prevent that from happening. Once the animal's outburst of anger subsided, Raoul eased the pressure. He figured it was like sending it a message. The problem was that no prisoner dared approach cell 1423. They all used alternative staircases or routes around it, fearing that the animal would break free at any moment and kill whoever came near. And no one wanted to be a hero when they had the option of going to safety. So Raoul was left alone with his cellmate, who refused to approach the gate to help since the animal had been caught, for the entire time it took to transfer the prisoners from the pavilion to the dining room, without support or relief, using all his energy reserves to keep the gate pressed down. After 2 interminable hours, he realized that in the entire cell block there was no one left but his cellmate, himself, and the animal behind the bars, which was no longer howling, but whimpering in pain. They had been abandoned by everyone, even the guards. They had been left to their fate. Raoul no longer had the slightest idea how long he had been pressing against the bars. He felt faint from exhaustion, fear, and the immense tension of knowing he was just half a meter away from a creature that would kill him as soon as he ran out of strength to keep pressing down on it, which wouldn't be long. And in that adrenaline-fueled state, he took a moment to look his rival straight in the eye. The creature had frozen, but Raoul could see in its red eyes that as soon as it felt free, it would continue doing what it was doing. It wouldn't stop. In its red eyes, he saw that this was its nature: to live, to kill. It had been in its eyes while it killed his cellmates, and it was there now. This was what he had come for. He couldn't allow it. He had to escape from that place. It took him a while to gather his courage. Then he asked his cellmate to prepare the mattress for the cage and fold it in half. His cellmate initially refused, but did so when Raoul said he was too weak to bear it and threatened to stop pressing down. Once he had done as he asked, he told him to carefully place it on the cage, tight enough to maintain constant pressure on the dog's body, but without triggering its pain and consequently its anger. His cellmate tried to do as he was told, but even though he hadn't exerted any pressure on the dog, it became furious and began barking, moving and howling every time it hurt itself against the cage. Out of terror, Raoul's cellmate stuffed the entire blanket into the space, then jumped on Raoul and ran. Raoul desperately adjusted the grate against the mattress and did the same, because the monster's howls were so piercing that it was impossible to listen to them for another second. He practically leaped from the second step of the stairs to the ground floor of the cell block, knowing the animal would break free and chase him. He could already feel its presence running at his ankles, ready to bite. If he hadn't continued to hear its howls, he would have jumped onto a desk or hung from a grate. He ran as fast as he could, always filled with that maddening howl. He crossed the cell block, the entrance corridor, then headed for the dining hall, where they were just now letting his cellmate in. He went in with the other prisoners, where the cowardly guards had already established a system to keep the inmates under control. In any case, the last thing the prisoners cared about was trying to riot. The animal's howls had them all disturbed. Raoul admitted that he had never before felt so safe, surrounded by so many prisoners in that jail. They all stayed there for the rest of the night. The howls, which had tormented them so much, stopped around 5 a.m, 4 hours after the massacre began, half an hour after Raoul managed to get into the dining room. At 6:12 a.m., military personnel arrived to take control of the prison. The inmates were taken to the yard and the entire prison was searched for survivors. Although the guards explained what had happened, it was pointless to think that they would be believed, since the dog's body wasn't where it was supposed to be. Raoul said that someone had informed him that a strange hair had been found on a fence. A thick, long hair, nothing that could be on the head of a human or a dog. According to reports, all the victims who were taken from their cells had nothing more than a row of large marks on their necks, which clearly demonstrates the systematic way in which the animal killed. It was always attacking the same spot. In any case, the Mexican authorities must have reached some conclusion, because they dismissed the guards' version of events, and the official report was that of a prison riot, in which inmates had killed 7 security guards, the warden, and 16 prisoners. The entire incident was covered up, and it was stated that security measures would be implemented to prevent a recurrence, although that never happened. Raoul never tried to find out anything more. In fact, he told me he tried to completely forget what he did, however heroic it might have been. He was the one who had seen it closest and lived to tell the tale. But when a former inmate saw him on the street and asked him about that time, about the chupacabra, when they asked him to describe it, he didn't want to say anything. Whatever he had seen in those red eyes, it wasn't something he wanted to remember or talk about. All of this helped me conclude that the purpose of this animal, wherever it came from, was none other than to test the limits of species on this planet. So far, it knows that killing livestock and small animals works for it, but the fact that there are no records of attacks on people indicates that either it stopped doing it again, or its attacks continued to be covered up. Or perhaps it engages in isolated attacks that can be mistaken for disappearances. Perhaps I'm speculating too much, but the topic has always fascinated me. The thought that there really is a being who provides evidence of the unknown, of life on other planets in the best case scenario. I couldn't understand why he wasn't as enthusiastic about it, And when I asked him, his explanation left me speechless. Their howls still wake me up at night.
That was quite the story. I'm really glad you were able to find a story that shared that side of their legend. So, I think the most interesting aspect of the chupacabra after hearing all of this is how it kills its prey, that it just drains them of blood. I feel like its appearance could easily be, written off as an animal with mange, something
Mhm.
along those lines. But how do you explain the puncture holes and the lack of blood in all of those livestock animals? And even in the story you shared, it sounded like the chupacabra still went after their necks. And
Right.
if it was a dog or a bear with mange, you would think that it would still catch its prey, cache its prey, eat it the same way that bears and dogs and those types of animals do. But we don't see any evidence of that happening.
Yeah, it's a
So,
very big curve off of the standard path.
yeah, I feel like that's the one thing that throws me for a loop because those other things can be easily explained.
Mhm.
Um, so maybe the chupacabra really is like this evolutional hybrid, some sort of bat crossed animal because bats are mammals. And maybe it's just a mange riddled hybrid animal. Maybe it's a monster. What do you think, Mariah?
I have a hard time following the idea that it's just, mange on a canine. I see how that could explain some of the sightings. There have been bodies or maybe body singular, autopsied and determined to be a canine. So, those kinds of things make sense. But it doesn't feel like that would cover everything we're seeing. You know, um, the world around us is already weird. We've got pistol shrimp who have like sound barrier breaking snaps. I don't know if that's the correct word for that, but they can kill with their snaps. A platypus, shoe bills, those things are creepy. But to say mange on a dog is every chupacabra, I don't think so. So I think I align mostly with the possibility of a hybrid kind of evolution. Like you said, I don't know if it's a bat with the blood sucking mammalian characteristics. Um, there's just so much in our current world that we know has been scientifically proven that are strange as it is. So counting out the likelihood of a chupacabra-esque creature being legit, I don't think we can do that yet. I would like to know how the blood sucking plays into everything, though. Is it just a little sweet treat? Is it just for fun? Is it nutritional? Is it supplemental? Are they getting something out of it, but they've got another larger part to their diet? It makes me think of pica and humans even, like maybe these blood-sucking sightings are a few oddball chupacabras that are just skewing the data. And this could be just like a very contentious topic for the greater chupacabra community. Maybe they're not as scary as the more public chupacabras, and we've just hit the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, maybe there's just some outlier chupacabras giving the rest of the community a bad rap.
Exactly.
This was so fun to research about and to learn more things about than what we thought we already knew. And so we really hope that you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you for
Yes.
listening.
Thank you for coming along with us, and we can't wait to see you next fortnight.
Whenever that may be.
Bye.
Bye. When you were describing the pistol shrimp, all I could think of was the meme of Danny DeVito where he goes, "So anyway, I started blasting."
Yes. Back to Danny DeVito. We're going to find a way to get him into every episode.
Danny DeVito, sponsor us.
Curious crows want to know, have you ever experienced a chupacabra? If you have any stories about paranormal or other cryptid experiences, send us an email. We'd love to hear about it and maybe even share it on a future episode.
Reach out to us at asthecrowflies.pod@gmail.com with any stories you want to share.